Hello, everyone. Today is November 4th, 2020. This is the Kubernetes Data Protection Workgroup meeting. Today, we are going to go over some CAP status. And after that, we have one topic about our data protection workflow white paper. So this one is about backup repository. We have Prashanto and Dave to talk about this. So let's first go over the CAPs. So we are trying to bring snapshot to GA. The CAP is already merged. API review is also done. Right now, there are PRs on adding the metric support on snapshot controller that is being reviewed. And then we also have several E2E tests PRs that are review in progress. And I just want to note it here that we used to have this snapshot, and there's a monthly meeting on volume snapshot. So now that meeting is canceled. So if you have any questions related to snapshot, you can bring that in this meeting. And then I want to briefly go over the graduation criteria in the volume snapshot CAP because we're trying to bring this to GA. Now we actually need to go over this production readiness review. So let's actually go over this. I think this is new in Kubernetes. I think we are the first in 6th version to go through this, so not even clear on what has to be done, but at least there are documents. So we do have documents for those. It's just we haven't really done anything like this before for any other features. So for bringing snapshot GA, we basically just listed what are the things that we are working on. So like the metric support that I mentioned earlier, that's work in progress. And then also tightening the CRD schema validation. So that's also, we have a PR there, it's being reviewed. And then production readiness review question, this is actually very lengthy, actually a lot of detailed questions. The first one is about feature enablement and the rollback. I think this is mostly for an alpha feature. I think in our case, we're actually already beta trying to go GA. So we did try to answer those questions, but I think this one is less important now because when your feature gate turns to beta, it's already turned on by default. So this one basically says like what will happen when you enable it, what will happen when you disable the feature gate, right? So, but in our case, from beta to GA, there's no feature gate change. It's already on by default. So I won't go through this one, but then there is also some questions about rollout, upgrade, and rollback plan. So if you go from beta to GA, you're supposed to support backward compatibility. So, upgrade, what type of tests that you have done for upgrade? Does it really support backward compatibility? So like a beta version of a volume snapshot should still work after the upgrade, things like that. So, and then also there's questions on metrics. So this is something that we are currently working on. So it needs to have some metrics. And yeah, so there are questions on whether you have tested upgrade rollback, but in our case, since we are still just still trying to bring this to GA, right, we don't really have it yet. So right now, we have done some manual testing. Well, since it's not available, it's not really possible for others to really do this test yet. So it's just, for us, it's just manual testing for now. And then, so this is one is about deprecation, so we don't have that. And the monitoring requirements talks about how so those are mostly about those metrics. So we do have metrics to measure how long it takes for a snapshot operation, And then also some error. If if error happens, we also have those type of indications, how many times we have those failures, how many times we have success. So we have those type of metrics. So there are those, and then I think there's also I forgot where that is. It talks about like the size of this change, like you're adding this API, right? So you're basically adding more API objects to Kubernetes API server. So like the size of that API object. So there are questions like that as well. I'm not sure where that is. I remember seeing that. And then CLI, this SLO service level objectives. This one is kind of hard to say what exactly is the reasonable ACLOs. And then dependencies. Does this depend on any services running in the cluster? So I think in our case, because snapshot is a CRD, is out of tree, so we depend on distros to package those and deploy them. CRD, snapshot controller, and then we also have this snapshot validation hook. Those should be destroyed by the distro, and then the sidecars and the CSI driver. Those are responsibility of the vendors, storage vendors. Oh, okay. I think this one, the scalability, is the one that was asking, like, what are you adding? What are the like the size of those API objects? What are the API costs that you're adding? Because you're basically adding more costs, basically increase the load of the API server, right? So it's those kind of questions. Yeah, so this is a size question. And okay, and then it basically talks about the troubleshooting. How do you troubleshoot this? So I think we can look at the metrics, and then we can also look at the logs. So that's for the troubleshooting. Yeah, so that's it. And are there any questions? So I think mainly right now we need to make sure that we get all the E2E tests there. I think we have a test plan somewhere about the E2E test. Yeah, so we have to have tests for the finalizers. So that actually we already have a E2E test that's been reviewed. We need to add tests for secrets. And then also we have a stress test that's also being reviewed. And then of course, once we add the metric support, also need the E2 test for those. So, okay. All right, so if there are no questions, I will go back to here. So I wonder, so this is a question for you guys. I'd like to know who are building products that are using CSS snapshots, or who have already got like release products that are using CSS snapshots. That will be really helpful if you can share, like if you want to put your company name, or it's even better if you can put a link there. You know, if you have a some website that shows, okay, we have this product using CSS snapshot, just to help us know who are actually using this and who would like this one to be, who would like this feature to go GA. Yeah, so if you guys want to, enter those information here, that'll be awesome. That will help us to push it to GA. Okay. All right, awesome. So we see custom K10, Trilio Vault. Awesome. And I know Valara also has I think it's probably beta feature that supports CSI snapshots as well. So I'll add Valara here. CSI. Right. Okay. So for the next one is a container notifier. For container notifier, we have that cap that's still being reviewed. I think there are still a couple questions that we need to get resolved. So we will need to schedule a meeting with the API reviewers to figure that out. Yeah, so next one is the generic data populator. Ben, you want to give an update on this?
Just like a status update for people that don't turn up these meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been having weekly meetings on Tuesday mornings Pacific time to go into detail on this. We've had 3 meetings so far, and we've made some progress. The proposal going into 120 had been to implement like a validating webhook to notice when PVCs had data sources that were never going to bind, that were going to result in a PVC that never bound. But we decided we didn't like that design and decided to go instead with a controller model where we just basically post events to PVCs that look like they're never going to bind because it's possible that the populator that will bind them is going to get installed later. So it's actually okay to have those PVCs sitting around just waiting for a populator to get installed. So that was the first sort of decision we made that would deviated from the original plan. We've spent some time talking about how we're going to implement the data populators themselves, and we're fairly happy with the scheme that I prototyped that involves basically creating a secondary PVC that is empty, that mirrors what the original PVC looked like, running either a pod or some other process on the empty PVC to populate it, and then rebinding the PV that got bound to that PVC back to the original PVC that the user asked for, so that at the moment their PVC binds, it already has the data that they were expecting, and any pods waiting on it can immediately start up. We've did some investigations about, can we support models like wait for first consumer with data populators, and we believe the answer is yes, with a little bit of extra work. And we spent some time talking about, given that there's going to be some fairly complicated code to implement the mechanics of the watching and the rebinding, and respecting all of the Kubernetes rules like wait for first consumer, we would like there to be some common code that can be shared among various populators. And it's an open question whether that common code will be like a sidecar container type thing or just a library you can import. For the sake of expedience, we're going to start off with a library, but try to keep our options open so that, you know, if we can turn it into a sidecar later on, we'll try to do that. But basically, we're making some changes to the KEP in 120. The feature will remain alpha in 120, and we're going to see how far we can get towards actually implementing the controller that posts events and samples of the populator mechanism and reusable code, so that we can get things rolling and maybe get to beta in 121. Any questions about that effort?
I wonder if maybe not everyone understands that if, you know, this importance of wait for first consumer yet. I think normally at the restore time, people probably just do static provisioning, I guess. right? So
I don't know what people do at restore time, but
I'm just guessing. I'm just because without this, I mean, you can't really do real. I mean, you can do dynamic provision, but you can't really support a wait for first consumer without this feature. I don't think so.
well, I mean, like today, the only thing you can restore from is a snapshot or another volume, right, through a clone, and those do support wait for first consumers, so that they would get scheduled to.
Yeah, if they do
pod.
that, but I think probably backup vendors mostly probably can't really use that feature directly at the restore time because their data, if their data is not really managed by the CSI driver, it's actually somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
If you have a backup scheme that involves like creating a pod and attaching it to the volume that the user will be using, then yeah, then you can't have a situation where you specify what the application should be at the same time you specify what you want to restore it from. You'd have to sort of go through a whole process to do a restore and then tell Kubernetes, I want to run this application. So yeah, it's like I view that style of backup and restore as like being layered on top of Kubernetes, which is fine and great. But what we're looking forward to is a version of all this where the restore happens inside Kubernetes as if you just specified a data source for a PVC and boom, your data pops out and like you didn't need to do anything as a user. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. At restore time, people normally, I think they normally just assume that the original data source is still there. I mean, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's not true. Maybe people already solved that problem outside.
What do you mean?
Oh, I'm just saying that normally, if you do static provision, right, and you kind of assume that it's the same the same storage, right, at the restore time. You're not really changing anything. It's static provision. You're not really dynamically selecting anything, so you don't really know if at the restore time if that like the storage location still has enough capacity or anything. You wouldn't really know, right? Because you're not really dynamically deciding where to place.
You can today create a scheme where you implement what is actually a backup and make it look like a snapshot, because we know that some snapshots are implemented as basically copying all the data from the volume to another place, and then
right. If it's kind of hidden under the CSI driver, yeah, you can do that, right? You can just do a create volume for a snapshot. That you can do.
So if your implementation is inside the CSI driver, you can make something that feels like a backup, but you call it a snapshot.
Right.
And you can just do that today. What we're trying to develop is something that is more properly a backup that doesn't have to be implemented inside the CSI driver, but from a Kubernetes perspective still feels very similar to just restoring a snapshot where you just say, hey, I want a volume that has this data, go. And we just want to basically break out of the shackles of the snapshot, the limitations of what you can and can't do in that model, and come up with something more flexible, but still have it be very much like a Kubernetes data source.
Ben, in this case, the external provisioner is out of the picture, right?
Not out of the picture. I mean, the external provisioner might be pulled in to create the empty volume onto which the data will get restored.
But then if you do that, then you can't really guarantee that. Then if you create an empty volume, then it's already bound, and then you can't really create a pod ahead of time, right? Well, no, so it depends on what you want to support. I guess
this is why we do the rebind trick and the second PVC to get around those issues, at least in the prototype. So
right. Sure.
I'm happy to go into more detail about how that all works, but I'm hoping that
I think
we'll just have code that demonstrates it all, and then it will be more obvious.
You're saying that there's a bi-weekly, is that right?
No,
it is weekly, right?
It's been a weekly meeting so far. The invite was sent out to the SIG storage mail list, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, because we started 3 weeks ago.
We can also, but I don't know if everyone during this meeting also have time to join that meeting, right? So that's why I think that actually is very important for people on this call as well.
Yeah,
So,
it's been a fairly high bandwidth meeting so far, but like we're slowing down now. Like we sort of had a bunch of stuff to plow through at the beginning, and now it's just a matter of coding. There aren't that many open questions, so I'm not sure what we'll discuss next week. We might want to reduce the frequency to every other week potentially. But I can post a link to the agenda doc, which has the Zoom link and all the other information in this agenda doc if you want.
I was so Ben, I'm thinking maybe good for you to like do an overview, just explain why we need that. I mean, I know because currently I think people already have their own solution that does not rely on that. But then if you can explain, why we need that, what is the advantage of using that feature, that would be very good, right? So maybe maybe
right now, or
I think probably you probably need to yeah, we didn't even talk about this one, so we still have some other topic to go through. Maybe next meeting, if you have some time, just to
well, I mean, we've gone through it a few times in this venue, like a couple months ago. I'm happy to do it again.
I wonder if you can draw like a simple diagram. I don't know if that's too much trouble, but maybe that will help
depends
people
on how
understand.
mature the discussion has been, right? If it's actively under discussion, then maybe wait until Ben is more comfortable, I would say.
I was thinking of like explain to people why we need that feature. Even, I mean, not even going to the details on how to solve the problem yet, right? Because we're not really it's still work in progress.
I don't want to give the impression that like we need this feature. Like there are many ways to skin the cat of a backup.
Right. But I'm just saying that but like when you introduce the feature, when you write the CAP, right, you have some section explaining the motivation, right? So in my case, I found this, I didn't realize this is that important until I realized that I need to wait for first consumer. So, but maybe, in general, of course, and we know this is useful, but for me, that was the one that I think we really need that if we want to solve this placement problem, which we currently cannot. So
well,
yeah,
we
just
can
like high level
in this meeting, or we can encourage people to come to the
we could do that too. Yeah, we could do that too.
And to go over that in more detail next week.
We could do that too. Yeah, we can. Yeah, so I can just forward that email to this mailing list as well, so people can go to that. That's fine too.
That's one way to do it.
Sure.
But also just maybe post a copy to the agenda doc in this agenda doc, so people who have that can just find it on their own.
Okay.
Without going through the email.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do both, and then people are welcome to come.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay, so then next one, Cozy. Basically, right now it's actually has been very active. There are still weekly meetings, POC in progress, and the CAP is merged. It's provisional, so it's doing a PVC as a POC implementation for this release, trying to go alpha in the next release, 1.21. And voting group, so there was a CAP there that has been reviewed. I think I need to schedule another review meeting. There are some questions being raised in the previous meetings, so that's why I have not scheduled a meeting for a while. I was trying to see how to solve that problem. So I updated the CAP. Take a look if you're interested, and then I will also try to schedule a review meeting for that. Okay. Next, we have a topic on backup repository. So let's see if Prashant, okay, I see Prashant there. Dave, not sure if Dave is here. So Prashant, this link you added here, looks like there's only half. It doesn't have the full link.
My bad. Let me just put that in the chat window.
Okay, so right, do you want to go over this? Well, actually, do you want, I don't know if it's better that you share. Actually, I can make you a
okay, that's fine.
Maybe this is maybe easier. Let me just do that.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, try that. I'll stop sharing. Does it work? Okay, yeah, we can see it now. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Shin. So hey everyone, Dave, myself, and Shin have been working on the backup repositories or the backup target piece for the overall data protection white paper. And overall, I'm going to go over high-level requirements of what we need for a target, but just kind of level setting why are we doing this. When we do backups or capture data from a Kubernetes environment, we need a location to put those backups into. We obviously have snapshots, and snapshots technology is good, but most times, obviously not the cloud providers, but most times snapshots provide a single point of failure. So you do need a centralized location where you would want to move your backups, especially from a migration perspective. And again, data has been growing at a very exponential pace today, and we need to ensure that the data, whatever we are storing or capturing within the repository, can handle scalability, performance aspects, and can be stored in a much more efficient fashion. So with those items in mind, the high-level objective of whatever we've done here so far is to provide some requirements for the target repository, and then along with that, any kind of guidance that we may have on specific items. I'm not going to go over all these items over here because they have been listed as characteristics in the table below. So we'll just start with this table. So the first item that we have is supporting multiple protocols, right? So from a target perspective, or where you store your backup data, we want to make sure, or the customer would want to store it, probably use object storage for scalability. There could be existing file servers, NetApp file servers or EMC, those storage systems providing NFS storage or something on those lines, which are already available in the customer environment, which they would want to connect to. Along with that, you may have data domain type of appliances, which may be a use case. Again, this is kind of looking at it in prioritized use case perspectives of what we expect to happen more or more. So obviously, object storage being first, then some kind of file storage, using technologies like data domain and so on next, and then the other point was, we were also looking at would customers want to store their uh, backup data on direct cloud storage like EBS or Azure cloud storage instead of using Azure Blob or S3, for example. We weren't 100% sure on this, because of the cost reasons and the usability aspect of it, unless and until customers are doing a lot of on-demand and continuous migrations and want to use that EBS volume as the central connection point between two clusters. There is a use case, but it's not that well defined in our opinion yet. Suggested improvements, we've been talking about Cozy. Cozy has a lot of APIs to create the object storage pieces, so that can be something that can be leveraged. There could be certain improvements that could be made to CSI as well, but because I believe Cozy is already down that path pretty much, we probably can just leverage Cozy to do all that. Obviously, certain things need to be kept in mind. Object storage for one entity may be different to another entity in terms of how it's implemented underneath the covers. And from that angle, migration use cases for this is migration from one target into another target probably needs to be thought through. What would be the underlying changes in terms of storage capacity, how it is laid out, performance, performance deltas, and so on. So after defining or listing the protocols, we would want to make sure that we are able to do this on-prem in cloud-based environments, whether it's Azure Blob, AWS S3, Google Cloud Storage. That would be the next kind of requirement from the target perspective. One is obviously supporting those protocols, and then the other one is supporting those protocols in different environments. Again, Cozy provides the APIs to do this, and can be achieved pretty seamlessly through that. From a redundancy perspective, customers do want to ensure that the target has some high availability. This could be geo-based high availability. If you're using cloud-based technologies, AWS, Azure, Google again, you can have the geo availability from a specific cloud provider, or you can also have customers looking for cross-cloud redundancy. Having a target created in AWS and then having that replicated to another volume or another kind of object stored within GCP or something. The next item here is long-term archival. So once once you start storing the amount of data into your different S3 buckets or Azure Blob Storage buckets or something like that, you may want to have a tiering policy that basically moves that data from S3 into even colder storage or even lower cost storage than S3, something like Glacier. I forgot what it's called on the Azure side, but they also have something similar. So this point basically talks about taking the data and basically based on retention policies or archival policies, you automatically move them into a lower cost storage if it's available, and having the target, or whether it's the target storage automatically moving that, or the backup vendor doing it, but that would become a requirement underneath the covers. I'm just going to take a quick pause. Any questions so far? Okay,
you mentioned CBT. Is there that requires kind of storage integration as well in some way usually, right?
Correct. So I think Dave, I was hoping Dave was on the call because Dave has some information around different kinds of target repositories, which he's defined as raw, passive, active. The raw target repositories are basically just kind of dumb storage where you put all that data into it. Passive and active is where those repositories kind of become a little smarter and help you with APIs to provide that information around CBTs, or doing full incremental snapshots, restoring that directly as a full synthetic backup directly from the target.
Yeah, makes sense.
You. So moving along, the next one is permissions. Once you have the capabilities of, obviously this probably all falls into the cozy aspect of it. When you're creating the target, you want to be able to create different kinds of object stores in different locations and apply the right permissions around it as well. So we probably would want to move this one up over here because it's all kind of provided by the same set of APIs that cozy presents. So overall, seems like cozy would be a pretty innate way of hooking into targets and doing pretty much the provisioning and handling of all the permissions for creating a target within Kubernetes or for Kubernetes. The next set of items are around encryption. Encryption, obviously, it could mean multiple things, right? The encryption can be provided by the backup vendor, or it could be provided by the storage vendor that is at rest. So one of the biggest things with encryption is obviously integration with different key management softwares and being able to interact with that key management software to get the right keys to decrypt the data and move it into the target storage, or if it's not encrypted at source, then taking that source information, encrypting it, sending it over the wire, or it could mean just having the target doing it at its level by doing data at rest kind of encryption, which would be kind of agnostic to the backup vendor, but would be handled by the target provider itself. So I think the net, the way we look at it is it should be kind of open. If the storage provider has the capability, the backup vendor should enable the storage provider to leverage that, because from a speed of backups and everything, that may be faster. And obviously, if that does not exist, then the backup vendor would want to provide that as well as a added feature. So I think depending upon how the customer's environment looks like, the encryption could be offered as choice. Next items, deduplication and compression. Similar to encryption, you would want the ability to enable, disable deduplication compression. Again, this can be provided by the storage target again directly, or can be something that the backup vendor can handle before sending it to the target. Again, this should be something around choice that should be available to the end user, the end customer. Deduplication and compression will obviously, speed up the transfer protocols. How much data you store on the target will also be reduced, so avoids not only performance savings but cost savings as well. And then finally, the last one was target management by multiple clusters. So let's suppose if you have one or two clusters mapped to the same target, which cluster gets to own the data and which cluster can access the data or delete the data should be well thought through. And there should be some kind of locking mechanisms or some intelligence underneath the covers through the software which is actually placing the data on those targets to ensure that there is no overlap, or the data is not incorrectly deleted or is actually accessed and deleted by the right source. So especially useful in migration scenarios, something that needs to be taken care of as well. From the backup notes perspective, provided some information around Cozy. I believe this information is probably better provided in what Shin is sharing in her main document. Along with that, there is Astrolabe. This is another open source project which focuses on kind of standardizing the target spec that we've been speaking about so far. So it would be interesting to take a look at that. And then the different backup repository types, as this is something that Dave had come up with, which I agree with as well. Initially, right now we are working with all raw kind of storages. Nothing, no intelligence on top of that. Everything is handled via the backup vendor to do full synthetic backups, merging your incrementals to the base full snapshots. So that is the world we are living in. But as things improve and as we abstract more layers to further application deployment and delivery, we will kind of see more of the passive and the active targets as well, where a lot of the handling of the incremental snapshots and merging them into full synthetic would be handled at the target level without really having to worry about it from a backup perspective. So just kind of some points to think about, to chew on, as we kind of grow through this data protection realm. As products get a bit more mature, you'll probably jump from raw to passive to active. That's it.
So I think this part, the raw passive active, I think this overlap with what we talked about in the CPT meeting. I think we talked a little bit about, like, if let's say if we support CPT, then should we have the backup repository managing those change blocks and trying to do the merge or those type of thing. And I think at least at that meeting, last time we talked about that we should leave that to the backup vendors and not really introducing that in our Kubernetes API. I think that's what we.
Yeah. So is Dave part of the snapshot or sorry, the CBT meeting as well?
Yeah, he was there as well.
So probably that is where he
that was after. Yeah, that was probably after this one.
Probably that was where he probably brought it up as well. So that's fine. It's only provided as suggestions and things.
Yeah. So yeah.
At a high level, this is kind of the crux of what we think the topic should be. And again, the inference right now based on talking to customers and so on, we see 80% are kind of aiming for cloud-based targets. Obviously, there are a lot of different reasons for which you want to do on-prem, but we see a combination of both, leaning towards cloud mostly. Any questions, guys?
You're mentioning backup repository Kubernetes APIs. Is that Cozy or is that additional stuff as well?
Which point are you exactly referring to?
Well, so this is kind of expanding on Jing's question. If we're, you know, what APIs do we want to make to support different backup repositories? Kind of, if any, right? Because I think Cozy is a pretty low level API that, you know, gives you an interface to object storage, right? So, you know, maybe the raw tier is the APIs we want to define, which we have essentially, right? We have block devices and, you know, file systems.
So I don't know if Cozy, I don't know if Cozy is raw or passive. Passive meaning what? Meaning that we provide an common API, right? What's the difference between raw and passive? Passive meaning we...
That was the same question actually I had for Dave. I think he explained it to me was more around, you know, having an API, obviously an API to talk to the passive piece, but raw, there would probably be no API and you would have to directly, you know, pick.
Call the native APIs basically, right? That's what I'm understanding. So I think Cozy is also a kind of passive API because that's trying to provide a common Kubernetes API.
But it doesn't give you snapshots, right? It's not a backup target.
It's not, but it's, I think, yeah, okay. So maybe, yeah, that's true. Maybe not. He's, I just pinned him. He's actually driving right now. So
the expectation is that the buckets that provided by Cozy will be used as backup destinations and sources for some implementations of backup, right? But those have to layer on top of Cozy.
Yeah, but I think if I look at what Dave was saying here, the passive, he mean this API actually can provide, you can actually get the snapshots, not just because I think Cozy, it only provision bucket, it not, you can't really even get objects, right? It can't really. So I think what he was talking about, I think this is like one layer.
Probably like contributing some code in the future to make it that way, I guess.
Yeah, I see Cozy as a building block to building an eventual backup API, but by itself, it's just object storage.
It's just a bucket. Yeah, it's just bucket. So more like a raw, but it's kind of have a common API for all the bucket.
But the question about like a Kubernetes backup API, like that's what we want to build here in this team, and it doesn't exist yet, but like we're working on it. So
yeah,
if,
so
if someone says there's a Kubernetes backup API, like they're pointing to something.
Oh no, that's the backup repository. That's not really backup API yet. Backup repository is just the repository part representing like your object store or NFS or something, or backup device, or on-prem backup device. That's the backup repository. That's not the backup API yet. The backup API, we don't have that yet. We have Andrew's doc. Well, he initially talked about that.
Wait, did Andrew Large present something and I missed it?
That was like almost in the very first meeting. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Might be that one. He was just talking about, I remember he talked about, okay, this API should be very similar to Snapshot, except that it has this pretty clear definition of what backup means. Backup meaning it's a different device, not your primary storage. Snapshot does not have that differentiation, basically.
So he and I agree on that, but like I've been hoping that he would post some more details.
I think Shanchi, I think someone is that Alexis is working on this, right? I think Alexis says he's working on the backup APIs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Backup APIs. Yeah. So maybe we can hear from that. Yeah. So that's the backup API. That's still not the backup repository yet.
Yeah, I think maybe we can figure out what the motivation of this is. My understanding of the white paper is basically that we want to kind of put together a summary of what we need to be able to perform backups in Kubernetes. And then the fallout of that will be the components in Kubernetes that we can build that will be useful for that. And so it seems like the motivation for backup repository is, maybe we expand Cozy to include the actual object interactions or maybe a different interface, I'm not, But I think for me, that's kind of what falls out of this section. The need for a common interface. In fact, there already are common interfaces out there that you can use, right? There's libraries that kind of abstract away cloud provider interactions. And so the question is, do we need to add that? Do we need to define one of those in Kubernetes? Is there something in Kubernetes that would have to directly interact with objects? Is there something that or can it just use kind of off-the-shelf interactions, right, directly using SDKs or other existing interfaces?
I think those are open questions, right? I think Shan Chen is, I think someone, is that maybe Alexis and Elliot are also working on this? Is that right, or no? Backup repositories.
No,
You mentioned something. They're not working on this?
no.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So I think this is still, Tom, I think that's still like an open question. Probably that's something that we need to still need to discuss and clarify what else do we need to do. So now we do have this COSI that is, I think it's pretty active project actually. But from that, do we want to add anything else for us to use that as a backup repository? I think that's still open question.
Yeah, and maybe you can treat it orthogonally from the white paper here too, right? This white paper, I think, I mean, this as is even summarizes kind of is a good summary of what backup repositories are, what they how they exist in the ecosystem, and maybe like as a separate task or a separate discussion. We can
we don't necessarily have to talk about like all the API requirements in the white paper. Yeah,
I think probably from a P0 perspective, this is good for now. Once we kind of achieve this, then we're gonna move into figuring out what APIs and everything are needed.
Yeah, I feel like what they were saying, the passive, it's more like, you actually have the API that can retrieve a particular snapshot, so you can actually use that at the restore time, kind of like that at that level.
Correct. Yeah, basically based on the restores, right? You don't have to worry about
so
how
that's
to...
what the Astrolabe battery has that. So
got it. Okay. So probably that's where he was coming from.
So that's the plugin. This is the Velar plugin for WithSphere uses that Astrolabe layer.
Got it.
To do those. Yeah, that's probably what he means, I guess. And then I think active is more, another layer that you actually, this backup repository layer actually also like kind of managing all the things that are stored there. Because if you're just using, let's say S3, it doesn't really manage those, like you have your change blocks, you have your, it doesn't really manage them for you, right? It does not really construct them for you. That's actually pretty complicated. So so I think that's what he means.
Yeah, basically, I think this will kind of centralize, how you interact with the target, whether you use one provider versus another provider. In the end, the target basically takes care of how, how the incremental blocks are put and merged and, converted.
I think, but at least last time when we talked about SPT, we thought, okay, this at least right now we don't want to, we leave that to backup vendors. So but.
One thing we might be able to add to this as kind of the survey is including the APIs that exist already for different storage providers, right? If we're interested in figuring out what abstractions we need to build, there's kind of two sides, right? There's like the storage side and then the repository side for this, especially with CBT. CBT is pretty hard to come up with.
For CBT, we have another topic for that, right? So right now, this is just the backup repository. So it's sometimes a little confusing, like we're talking about. It's CBT that's have a different set of APIs, right? Or are you, Tom, are you only talking about like how we like do merges for those CBTs on this backup repository layer? You mean in that level of
my view of backup repository is that it's able to handle consuming like change blocks to help make it efficient. But that may be like a higher level layer, right? I think this is actually talking about the primitives that, like the storage primitives that backup repositories consume. And so there's kind of two sides, right? There's what does the repository need, even a higher level repository layer, and then what do the volume storage providers provide? And that's, I think maybe that's what you're talking about is in the CPD discussion. So I can follow up there.
Okay, maybe we can talk about CBT more and then come back to this one.
Sounds good. Anything else, guys? Anything else we need to talk about, or anything else we probably need to add here?
Yeah, so this talk is linked in the agenda. So please review it. If you have any comments, feel free to add to the doc.
Prashanta, where do you think Restic would fit in this kind of framework?
It's interesting. I think Restic would probably be another. I think my knowledge around Restic is not that great, but what is the underlying storage that Restic requires? It can be anything, right?
It's an object store typically.
Okay, so probably it would
Is
probably
it
be something on
object?
top of one of these, I guess.
Does Restic require that the backend to be object store, or can be NFS?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe the form that we use it in is always object store, so that's the only one I know about. But
oh, you use
maybe
Restic as well?
Yeah, Restic is really cool.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know if it could also use like an NFS store.
Oh, okay.
But you can just give it like a volume and give it a bucket, and it'll back it up and restore it.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then it would probably be one of these, and then on top of that, it would be superimposed, kind of like abstracted.
But that, I don't know. It seems to be itself. It's not really it still need a backup repository for the data to be stored. I think it's not like.
Well, you need some metadata to remember where your backups are, but.
Right, but I mean, itself, it's not like a S3 object store type of thing, right? It's just, I think that should be called something else. I'm not sure what. It's almost that's the way to do the backup for you, right? It's not really.
Yeah, it's like the primitive layer of just doing the backup and the restore, and then you can build on top of that.
But it's not. Yeah, it's not just the repository. The repository meaning that this is like the place where you store your data, because using Restic, you still need to specify where to store it, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work, I guess.
Well, I guess I'd be careful around using this term repository, because what matters is that you have an object that represents a place that you can do a backup to, and then another object that represents what you can restore from. And a repository is a nice way to conceptualize what that is, but it's kind of rigid and not as flexible as you might want. Or you might want the ability to move backups between repositories, or do other things with, like, have meta repositories. There's all kinds of other constructs that you could imagine. But what matters is that that when you take the backup, you know where it's going to go, and when you're doing a restore, you know where it's coming from.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Restic documentation right now, and it talks about preparing a new repository. It can be local, can be S3, Minayo, Wasabi, Azure, Google Cloud Storage. So it would
Use for a lot of different.
So
backend, actually.
Restic is like a Swiss Army knife for data backup and restore.
I think it's just performance is not good, right? I think that's the only downside.
Yeah, I mean, because it reads all your data to do the backup, which is, if you don't have anything better, it's better than nothing. But it's not always the best way.
Yeah, Restic can be a backup vendor in itself, because it provides like even encryption and selective backups and things like that. I mean, obviously not 100% for a Kubernetes environment, but someone could extend on top of it.
Yes, like Valero builds on top of that, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is, how do we want to define the boundaries of what's in the repository? Is it, because it seems like there's many layers, right? How do we name these layers? How do we talk about them? That's kind of my meta question.
Tom, I think the repository is just a placeholder, right? With regarding what gets stored into the repository is not really our decision. Like Restic can choose to store something, and some other mechanism can choose to store others.
I think having a conceptual repository is good when there's more than one choice for where to put the data. But once the backup is created, like it's in a place, and the object that you'd use to restore from better know what that place is without any external references, I think. Like if you can only back up to like But the way snapshots work, right? You don't have the option of like, where do I want my snapshot to go? You just say, I want a snapshot, and it goes where it's going to go. You get 0 choices, or you get 1 choice, the snapshot destination. So
but
like,
snapshots still have a reference, like the snapshot handle. I can
yeah,
imagine handle like
what I mean is that there's no choice to make about where do I want it to send the snapshot. There's just the snapshot. With backups, the extra detail is maybe you give a menu of options. I can back up to here or here or here, and you know, which one do you want?
I think it's actually bad, but it's on both sides too, right? Because you also, the things you consume are very different, right? You might want to consume, for example, output from, you know, MySQL dump. You might want to consume a file system directly. Whereas with volume snapshots, you know the thing you're taking the backup of.
Yeah.
So that backup, you know, I think there's a lot of layers in backup repositories that make it a little more complex than the snapshots.
I think we are running out of time. Yeah, looks like we maybe need to talk about this more. Just define like what at the layers, what should be handled by backup repository, what is not. Yeah, so yeah, maybe we can have some follow-up discussions on that. All right. Thanks, Prashanto.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
All right. I think that's it for today. Are there anything else? Otherwise, we will meet in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Shen.